Welcome back to the Tide Generator podcast. This episode is about expanding storytelling with Transmedia design. Our topic originated with a talk presented by one of our guests, Wiena Lin, who spoke at InfoComm 2020 Connected about creating engagement through socially conscious design. That ideal has become even more vital as we strive for change with new urgency in response to global demonstrations against racial injustice. Experience design ideally reflects many voices for many audiences. How can we shift the medium and the message for greater good? Hello, and welcome back to the Tide Generator podcast. We're happy to have you with us today to talk about the topic of expanding storytelling through transmedia design. Today's topic originated with a talk given by one of our guests today, Wiena Lin. She did a topic at InfoComm 2020 Connected about engaging with socially conscious design. And as that topic becomes increasingly vital in response to greater urgency around global demonstrations against basically global demonstrations against racial injustice and hundreds of years of problematic thinking within our society and within media. We really wanted to expand this conversation to talk about experience design, which is, at its best, in its ideal form, it does accommodate and welcome many voices and speak through many different mediums. So today we really want to look at how we can expand that conversation and what we can do from here. So with me today, I do have Wiena Lin. She is creative director with Public Good Labs. Welcome. Hi.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks for joining us. And I have Mary Franck. She is a creative director with ESI Design. Hello, Mary.
Hello.
Hi. And we have Daniel White. He is a senior experiential media producer. I'm glad to have you all here. And I know that you know each other in real life, so that's kind of helpful. We all know each other in real life. That's very convenient. And we're all in the same borough. So we're all in Brooklyn. So welcome. So on this topic, we're framing it around what we do in our industry, but really what we're looking to talk about today is, how can we incorporate different voices for different audiences in what we do?
Yeah, I think that just to kick things off, that so much of the execution of projects is actually, it's that may remain largely consistent regardless of the voice. Our hardware approach, our technical approach to things is agnostic oftentimes of the message. And so in that way, if we're thinking about tackling problems with platforms, then those platforms can actually accommodate a wide range of content and therefore a wide range of voices. And so, from a technical perspective, it really shouldn't be a challenge to listen to different voices and to incorporate different content creators for different audiences.
Yeah, and if I could pick up on that, I think that the technology is agnostic. So the question then becomes, and it's the question that we all approach when we are putting, whether it's a piece of media together or a live event or interactive content, what's that team and who are those people that are coming together to put that thing together, and what are those roles and what do they look like? And I think that right now the current way of doing that is that you just kind of think about who your contacts are, who you know that knows how to do a certain thing, and try to get things done as quickly as possible for the minimum amount of money. And those imperatives are always going to be there, but I think we have to take sort of a wider angle and understand that not necessarily everyone gets a chance to be in that initial group sitting at the table. So we have to think about how do we make that a more inclusive place.
That's a great point, Daniel. I think it's true that recruiting practices often lend lend themselves towards people, bringing in people they already know, and that just reinforces the same networks that are already existing. It's, the myth of American meritocracy is just that. It still remains a country that's really driven by who you know, and we can work to change that in our industry. In relation to the idea of involving more voices in storytelling and in experience design, I think something that I was thinking about is ways that we can create formats that allow for multiple stories, multiple storylines, and allow people to be co-creators. I think, the tradition of storytelling, we think of Joseph Campbell, the hero with 1,000 faces, and I think that really focuses on a singular protagonist. And something that has been, a trend across media, it's not new, but I think it's something that we're seeing a lot of is, narrative that isn't single point. And I think that format in particular lends itself to more inclusive storytelling. As an example, I was actually thinking of Minecraft, the sandbox game, and in researching it, I realized that it's actually the top-selling game of all time. So I think that people there's an interest, and a business-wide interest in people actually being creators and being storytellers in their own, on platforms, and collaborating and sharing the stories with each other.
Do you think the real-time nature of some of experience design allows for more narratives to exist in a free-form format like that, where it can shift and change?
Yeah, I think especially as we are starting to reconsider what an experience at home might look like, as opposed to an experience that requires your physical presence, that can be much more individualized. So that could be for not only the content creators, but also for the audience.
I've been excited. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Daniel.
No. I was going to say that we already look to try and have like interactivity and sensor interactions and things like that as a way of sort of driving the on-screen display, that you have someone who's interacting with what's actually happening, or is in some way modulating the content on screen. So it's really just about making sure that ability to control those sensors is as accessible and available as possible, whether that's thinking about people of different abilities physically, or thinking about making sure that you are placing those sensors in the right sort of marketplaces where you're going to be talking to different people. Those kind of thoughts, which we already are working on, just need to be we need to take a wider angle on them.
And Mary, you were starting to say you were excited about.
I've been excited about the Microsoft Hubs platform. They released it, I think, a few years ago. So it's not new, but I think people have taken a new interest in it because of the pandemic and the quarantine. The ITP program at NYU did their spring show on the platform, and I think that it did an interesting job of bridging a virtual experience with feeds from people's individual homes and simulating an installation environment, since a lot of the work is oriented towards installation. I'd be really interested to see more work like that, and maybe combining a platform like that allows anyone with a web browser or a VR, headset to have that experience, bridging that with a physical installation using, AV technology.
Yeah, that's probably one of the side effects, the positive side effects that are coming from this forced hybrid way of attending events and everything right now, and making experiences that work in the home, is that we will be able to provide greater access, and that in itself ends up opening things up to be more inclusive. Are you already thinking about that, about how we might be able to continue to grant people access, whether, remotely, or depending on, there were a lot of limitations. There were physical limitations to who could participate in these events in the past. Are you starting to think about how that will widen the angle, as you're saying?
I think so much of the word access is really telling here, because I think when we rely on for-profit companies to create platforms that allow for connection, there's introduces a lot of problems. And so I think that's the other aspect of what is exciting to me about having an organization like Mozilla put out tools in this way.
Yeah, that could be the good thing, I guess. So I think that's what we were talking about, the notion of experience design and the phrase experience design and how that might evolve into transmedia, which the phrase itself is about multiple mediums, multiple screens, multiple network devices to tell a story. Do you think that this all kind of goes hand in hand to create a more inclusive, more accessible, grant more access to people with whatever device or whatever mode they have to participate?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that can lead to a much deeper connection with the brand as well, because formerly, you might see a $1 million installation in Times Square. You'd see documentation of tourists stopping by, having a 30-second long or minute long experience, taking some selfies, using a hashtag or not, posting, their experience within this booth. And then the value there for the brand was supposed to be that other people saw their videos on social media and somehow felt a kinship to that product all of a sudden because they were cool and they had spent money, on an installation. And at the end of the day, it's like, how much emotional connection can the consumer, the person who's watching this video, actually feel, versus if they're comfortable in their own home and you're able to reach them like literally where they are, either through targeted messaging on their phone or in a desktop experience. I think that has potential for a different type of resonance, and like arguably could be much more specific to that individual. So I do think that we're going to, by virtue of that development, and then also by virtue of the fact that like we are all at home, I think we'll start to see web platforms and mobile platforms become much more robust storytelling devices. I think the New York Times is making has made a ton of headway in this. And to me, it's, maybe we're not exactly getting to this place of where everything is virtual or everything is augmented, but I think a lot of the desktop experiences that we have could be more immersive, where there is a less linear narrative that's told, that allows for more participation, but that also it feels more cinematic. It doesn't necessarily just feel like a parallaxed website or something like that.
Yeah, and I think that kind of gets to, for a long time, the industry was focused on like impressions and a very quantitative look at how many eyeballs are you getting on a screen or walking through the doors of an activation. And now, because we're all in this sort of like limited channel, it's a chance for us to say, like, what could we do with this and how do we make this a more sort of qualitative, like how do we enhance that part of that experience and eventually take what we're doing in our homes and on these sort of more limited devices and put that back onto the bigger canvases that we are hoping to get back to and want to work on. So it's like we have this chance to take people who are right in their home and then eventually go and broadcast that out into all these sort of different bigger experiences and bigger canvases.
Right, it's a really interesting moment for experimentation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes me wonder, how does that work out, since we are, our audience is really interested in the hardware piece of this. What does it mean for the integration of maybe some of the displays that might be used in a space versus being able to deliver to people across a variety of platforms? How does that change your design approach?
I think that maybe the location of the person where they're interacting with their mobile device or where they're interacting with, like a computer or something that has more ways of interacting with it. I think the location of that, the guest or that audience member is a little less important than the fact that now they kind of have this like high fidelity remote control in their hand and they can engage with the narrative so that it becomes this more of a conversation as opposed to like a didactic advertisement or a didactic story that's being told. And so I can imagine a space in which, you start experimenting with a mobile phone and content on your TV or on your computer, but then that same interaction that's kind of prototyped at home ends up being applied out of home on a billboard. And so maybe there's an interaction between your mobile device and the billboard. So I do think that, we're kind of testing the waters now, and that we're determining where that appetite lies, so that when we can actually access greater canvases, and those canvases can be seen by much larger audiences, we'll kind of know, we'll have taken these baby steps to suss out how people want to engage. And then, of course, it's a matter of like, well, what does this look like when it scales? And that'll be another really exciting moment in the development of this medium.
Yeah, when I think about the expanding audience, kind of what Daniel, you were saying about, it used to be a numbers game about, people who, how many people showed up and saw this, how many people walked by, maybe had an impression, impressions, maybe some dwell time thoughts. I think, Daniel, you were talking about this movement, the Path for Progress pledge that small and medium businesses can make. And one of the things I noticed on that was to talk about developing diverse user personas. Do you think that's going to be something that could be one of the first places we could do this, is to think more? Because now the user persona is going to be people who might show up, people who might be viewing it remotely, people who are, for me, it's the people who are viewing things like on public transportation. I just feel like the more personas we can open it up to, and the more people who are looking to click into something quickly. How do you see that changing things?
Yeah, I mean, there's that sort of like story points way of understanding like how things are going to build and what that sort of narrative progression is going to be. And I think that what we have a chance to do right now is just make sure that when we are building these personas, we are making sure that they are reflective of the population at large and have the most sort of expansive views that they can. Because right now, people kind of default to a sort of limited viewpoint. They have a very sort of passive way of thinking of their audiences. And what we need to do is be more active in terms of like trying to engage with people and bring people into the experience that we're building, so that we are doing our best to reflect society at large, and not getting down into, okay, we've always talked to these people, how do we enhance on talking to the same people again? Like, no, how do we talk to more people? How do we open that up?
Yeah, I think that's, Mary, when you're designing for the built environment, you're probably you're creating for personas, but I mean, how do you feel like this is going to change? Like, do you have, there's going to be even bigger list of people that you're trying to think about, or?
Yeah, I think in the built environment, often we have there's actually more control over context, or more knowledge about context, than there is online. Online, I think that the thrilling part about working online is that, you could have someone from the other side of the world, a completely different age, like all of these things. There is a sense of audience inclusivity that the web makes possible that just doesn't end up being the case in a city in the same way. We do use personas, and I think that helps us think through what people need to, what they might be there to learn, what they might be there to do, what's going to be of interest, how long they might engage with some content. And I think that we usually orient that around the kind of goals of someone in the space, their role within an organization. Often we're working within private architectural spaces. But I think that we all need to examine the assumptions that we make more closely. I think on all of the different layers of decision making that we make. I think the role of AV technology does still relate very strongly to the built environment, or at least to public spaces and to the physical world. I think consumer to AV technology has come such a long way. People don't need professional AV equipment for their home. So what is the role of professional AV equipment, professional AV services, in a radically different context? And I think that we can still try to serve, public and civic endeavors the power of, a space like Times Square is because it becomes symbolic. It's a place for communication at a really large scale, and that scale is powerful, and we can use that scale to broadcast the messages that we think matter.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think, when we start to think about that, it makes me think of what you were saying, Wiena, in your talk about brands now needing to think more about doing social good and how people are going to be watching closely, and how brands can actually make their viewer, the consumer of the content, the hero, if they can connect all those pieces to make something feel virtuous and to share it in a way that feels inclusive. How do you see that being important for brands to start addressing?
From what we're seeing now, especially, first I think consumers were looking to brands to put their money where their mouth is in terms of contributions to healthcare and wellness during COVID. And then, of course, with, the injustices that were revealed during that, then it became about, the messaging that was needed was about solidarity. I think that, as we looked around our communities and looked for support, there was kind of this opportunity for brands to step up. And as brands started doing so, it brought to our attention the brands that weren't doing so. And so, I think that is the exact moment we're in as we're recording this podcast. Because I pay attention to the environmental sustainability space, I'm also starting to see that conversation tie more into long-term thinking, where it's like, okay, so systematically people have been left out of the conversation, and that's affecting health, mental health, like safety. And then as we look forward beyond, the immediate healthcare crisis in front of us, my sense is that we'll start to also think about, issues in climate change and how global social justice is closely tied to, the outcomes of different communities around the world there as well. And so, again, I think that in a way, capitalism has just kind of supplanted the role of government, where these global brands are kind of now reaching more people than governments are reaching their constituents. And, they also have a lot more capital. And so there's an opportunity for them to do the right thing. And what's really important there is that in their hierarchy, that there are people at the top who are actually thinking about global social justice. And as we're learning about in this particular moment in time with Black Lives Matter movement, it's really important to listen, not just to assume that you know what the right message is, but actually to clear the way for community members to express what they need, and then to support them in funding and amplifying the platforms that they already have identified.
Yeah, and I think something, and just kind of picking up that point there, I think something that brands could definitely do is take a cue from the arts. And we're seeing a lot of messages that are bubbling up in artistic and art installations that brands can allow their platforms to promote and to broadcast, whether that's, posting something on your Instagram story, or using your billboard outside of your store as a canvas for a group that otherwise wouldn't be able to get onto that sort of space. Those are all different areas of opportunity that I would hope that the brands are already sort of turning their attention towards, since they have such a wide audience that they reach already.
Yeah, that's a good point. We have, anyone who has a platform, it's time to amplify. And I think that might be an interesting thing for us to think about, and as a group is, how do you see this story changing? We were just getting into some of this real time, data generated art, and it used to just kind of reflect maybe a building's feelings, or maybe some statistics of humans who were moving through a space. But are you already starting to think in your head how the storytelling itself might change, how the content itself might change?
I think that, to echo what Daniel and Wiena have said, I think that now is a great time for people who are creative professionals, who are storytellers, to take more of the role of curating, amplifying, and creating platforms for other voices, as we started the discussion. And so I think that that's something that is really interesting. I think it's a way to make richer and more kind of meaningful work.
Yeah, and I mean, as you democratize your message, you are going to, by necessity, reach more people, and that's going to make your channel, your platform, that much more effective. So there's something in it for the brands to have this inclusivity as a main plank.
Yeah, when we are inclusive, we do think about bigger numbers. Like we were saying, like when we talk about personas, and we were having a conversation earlier this week with some people from the AV, the tech manager world, and we talked a lot about the client-facing idea, and how we need to expand who the client is, and we need to change our view of, what does the client look like? What does the client facing person need to look like? It used to be very much about look. And I think this is a really amazing time to rewrite a lot of those things. And I think, the more inclusive, the bigger the audience. It actually kind of ends up being pretty simple. We should go for that.
Yeah. And I think, like, what's great about this time right now is that for the longest time, it was thought that to mention inclusivity or to mention cross-cultural or intersectionality would be divisive in a certain way. And I think what we're seeing out on the streets is that ultimately that is going to cast the widest net. You're going to bring the most people in that way, is by having messages that speak to everyone and listen to everyone.
Yeah, it's time to just call it human instead of political. That's an interesting point. Well, I guess, looking to the future, I always want to try to think about, I don't know, I feel like things are being rewritten right now in real time so rapidly. And I think we have the chance to declare right now what we want to see. What do we most want to see rewritten? So I guess, what's your biggest dream that we could change right now?
Tear it down. I mean, I think that we're given this amazing pause to not only consider what it is that we want, but then also we have oftentimes some members of our community have the opportunity to really consider what it is that's important to us, and what the kind of chain of events were that brought us to this moment, and what I think a lot of people are considering, what does our involvement look like moving forward? What's the outcome that we want to see, and how can we help to engender where things go? And so I think it's a really good time to take an honest look at who the messaging is coming from, who's making the technology, and to consider habits that we have. Are these actually things that are the practices that we engage in on a regular basis things that we want to engage in, or are they things that we've kind of been coerced and trained to do and to accept? And I think personally, in a lot of the especially through the artwork that I've done, I've realized that a lot of my aesthetic choices they're not my choices. They're actually they come from a Western education, and as we start to analyze C-suites within companies, and people step down and are replaced with a more diverse team of people, and we start to more deeply analyze the content creators out there, I think that different audiences will wake up to the fact that the media the mainstream media that they consume doesn't just have to be of a voice that might not inherently be their own voice. And also the thing that they thought they liked maybe isn't really inherently their choice either. So I think that, this is a really great opportunity for considering like what our personal cultures are and how we can be more true and honest about those. And, hopefully that leads to just more harmony, more peace, more harmony, more justice.
Yeah, we have this moment to be sort of meditative, and that way we can be more intentional with the actions that we take and less passive. And I think there's space for that in culture at large, and then definitely space in our industry to, we call these things activations that we build. It's like, how do we activate the most people? How do we reach out? What are those things? And right now is a great moment to sort of educate ourselves and figure out, well, what are our blind spots? What kind of things were we not thinking about before? What people were we not thinking about and not considering before? And how do we consider them in the future?
I think the demonstrations are also this moment. It feels like, all of these people are waking up to their own agency and realizing that if we do collaborate and work together, that we can make change if we all are civically engaged and we all hold our representatives and our government systems accountable, and if we like do it in a coordinated way, or even a distributed, networked way, that we have a power that I think we didn't realize that, or I feel like I didn't realize that I had, and it's a moment where I think that because maybe of the surreality of this pandemic, it's making us realize that terrible things are possible, but maybe also incredible things are possible. And maybe we can make something really magical come out of this by creating justice and, enabling things that we hadn't imagined before.
Yeah, the stories we tell really do have the power to be evocative, and we can use technology in ways that are really emotional and can really connect with people. And I feel like this is opening up that possibility even more. Let's get even more earnest in our attempts to connect. So yeah, that's pretty great. All right. Well, I think that actually wraps this up for this podcast, as we look ahead to trying to tell new stories across new mediums and bring in new voices. And I'm really glad that you could join me today for this particular topic. And I really want to keep talking about it. We will be doing more articles, more podcasts and events, bringing more voices in. So thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so glad we could do this.
Thank you guys. Looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Tide Generator podcast, produced by Avixa. Find it wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll see you next time.